Welcome, everyone, to the NeuroTech course on learning how to translate and commercialize neurotechnology. A little background on myself. My name is Clayton Bjorklund, and I have over 20 years of GLP experience working as a member of a quality assurance unit for one of the largest global healthcare technology companies in the world. My experience has been primarily in the large animal medical device arena. The objective for this course is for you to understand when to apply the requirements of the US FDA GLPs to your neurotechnology program. So to understand when to apply your program, you'll need to know a little bit about the GLP regulations themselves. These regulations are federal regulations established in 1978 by Congress. These were established in response to some fraudulent research being performed by the industry. The regulations provide a framework for non-clinical laboratory studies that support a submission to the FDA and do represent the FDA's minimum good scientific practices. These regulations are intended to assure the quality and integrity of the safety data submitted to the FDA and to protect the public by setting and enforcing a basic set of standards for preclinical research. So when is GLP needed? GLP regulations do apply to any non-clinical research study that is intended to support a submission to the FDA. Now, the FDA does acknowledge that the use of a non-GLP site may be necessary. This is typical when a specific skill or expertise is only available at a particular non-GLP site. If you do end up using a non-GLP site, you must declare these gaps to the GLP regulations and assess those gaps for overall impact to your study. Now, for most programs, one study is all you're going to be able to do, mainly due to the cost of the study themselves. So the use of a non-GLP study for your submission may be pretty high risk. If the FDA feels that that study does not have the necessary data integrity or show the necessary safety results, you may be required to redo your work. Now, typically, the cost of doing a study GLP versus non-GLP adds about 10% over the original cost. In my opinion, this cost is minimal compared to the risk of submission of a non-GLP study. In addition to reducing the risk by using a GLP lab itself, you will also be able to apply all of the good scientific practices that GLP will provide for your program. Now, the following slides will cover these good scientific principles that will be applied when you use a GLP site. The first major concept is controls around organization and personnel. For personnel, this will mean that the individuals providing any type of service or doing any of the steps of your study will have the appropriate education, training, and background to do those particular tasks. For a neurotech study, this means that your team will have neurophysiology and neuroanatomy background and be able to conduct your study as needed to meet the research goals that you intend. This will also mean that you will be assigned an individual study director. The study director is going to be your single point of control for your study. They will be there to assure that your study is being conducted in accordance with the protocol and to assess that all situations that may occur during your study have no impact on the study and to assure that all data has been appropriately collected and retained. In addition to the study director, the regulations will provide a QAU to provide independent oversight of your study. The QAU is really the FDA's eyes and ears for themselves while your study is being conducted. It's an independent body that will provide oversight and occasional audit of your study itself to assure that all the regulations are met and that all of your protocol elements have been executed as per the protocol. Now, as a sponsor, your interaction with your study will vary, and this will depend on what type of research you are conducting and what your skill set can provide for added appropriateness. If you have a particular skill or a particular expertise that the study will need, you are more than welcome to participate in your study itself. Work with your study director to see what services you can provide and what your role may be for your study. The second big concept that the GLPs will provide is controls around facilities. The regulations will at least provide some frameworks that the study requirements of your site are actually appropriate and that the site can meet these requirements. In general, the regulations require that if a site is required to do a particular task, they have to be able to do that task appropriately. This will also include reagent and solution control. This is a very common issue for most GLP sites or non-GLP sites. Reagents that are used must have appropriate labeling, and there's quite a bit of labeling that's required by the GLP. And the big part is the use of expired reagents is not allowed under GLP. For NeuroTech studies, the facilities will need to be suitable for implantation, in-lab observation, and postmortem assessment. The third concept that the GLPs will cover will be equipment. GLP studies use a variety of equipment from start to finish. The regulations will require that all equipment used for your study be appropriately designed to function as intended, and that they be cleaned and maintained as needed to assure that the equipment's functioning. If you're using equipment for data generation, calibration and validation may be required. Imaging equipment is critical for most neurotech studies, particularly for implantation and for periodic assessment as you go through your study. So these are types of equipment that for a neurotech study, you want to keep very tight controls over. The FDA expects that all equipment be serviced or maintained per the manufacturer's specifications. Now, this may trip some people up. If you are intending to do any type of maintenance or calibration that is outside the manufacturer's requirements, make sure that you have appropriate scientific justification for that alternative. The fourth concept is standard operating procedures. The GLP regulations require a slew of standard operating procedures be written and be provided to the staff to cover a variety of different areas. If you would like to see the actual list itself, just see 5881 in the GLPs. In general, if there's a critical task that's going to be performed by the site, there should be an SOP that covers that task. Now, deviations from these tasks may occur. The regulations require that deviations from established SOPs be authorized by the study director. All SOPs must be readily available to all staff and should be detailed enough to provide appropriately work direction to the trained individuals. Basically, can your staff provide the service or task they need to do without asking a lot of questions? If the answer is yes, your SOP should be of sufficient depth. The next section would be test and control article controls. The GLPs require that all test and control articles used in a GLP study must be thoroughly characterized and that these methods of synthesis or creation must be documented. In addition, the stability of the test and control article must be determined. All test and control articles must be appropriately labeled and traced from receipt to final disposition. That may be returned to the sponsor or destruction during final testing. For neurotechnology studies, you will need to be able to show thorough documentation that your test articles are built appropriately, functions as intended, and is stable for the period used on the study. A few tips for testing control articles. It is extremely important for you to know which device iteration you are using for your study. The FDA does expect that you use your final device iteration, the one intended for market, for your GLP testing. If you are intending to use an earlier device iteration, your submission must explain what that device iteration was and how that data still applies to your final iteration. In addition, the FDA expects that you use the same packaging, sterilization, and shipping process that you intend to use for your marketed product. If the use of this is not possible for your study, you will have to at least call this out and then address any impact to your study. Protocol. The regulations have specific controls around protocols. Protocol is required for every GLP study and must contain all the elements listed in the regulations. For more information on what's needed, see 58120 in the regulations. The protocol must be clear and must include all study methods. And one thing to keep in mind, protocols, although written pretty detailed, they are not cast in stone and can and will be amended as needed for your study. A few tips for protocol. Bias control. So this is a huge thing for the FDA. In order to minimize bias, several techniques can be employed. These are my favorites that I've actually pushed for my industry. So employee blinding, randomization of both implanting and staff, the use of control articles, appropriate sample sizing, and the biggest one is pre-declaring your statistical methods that you intend to use for the analysis and reporting. To me, this is one of the biggest and most important bias controls you can put into your study. The protocol should also clearly list the pass and fail criteria for your test articles. In addition, you should remember to always follow all USDA requirements for the ethical treatment of animals, and your protocol should be very clear on this. Please see 9 CFR Parts 1 through 3 for more information on the USDA requirements for animal welfare. For neurotechnology studies, the protocol must include all methods necessary for the successful implantation, in-life evaluation, and post-mortem assessment of your test article. Conduct of a study. So the requirements around the conduct of a study are pretty extensive, and I do recommend reviewing this section in totality. In a nutshell, the study does need to be conducted in accordance with the protocol. Now, deviations are going to occur, so when deviations do occur from the protocol, these must be communicated to the study director, and they must be assessed, and they must be resolved. All data generated from your study must be captured at the time it is generated and must be legible and have the identification to the individual who created it. This includes date and time of creation. Any changes to the data must not obscure the original entry, must have a reason for that change, and must be signed and dated by the individual making the change. Revision control is greatly important to a GLP study. For records and reports, the final report must be prepared containing all of the elements found in the GLP regulations. See 58-185 for the full list of details that a report will contain. Upon completion of the final report, all of your data, documentation, protocols, specimens, and reports must be retained in the archives. Wet specimens are going to be retained for as long as they afford analysis, and this will vary depending on the type of wet specimen you are retaining. Your archives need to be secure and will need to have limited access. A few tips and tricks for records. When completing your first report, it is critical that you address any deviations or unexpected outcomes that may have occurred during the conduct of your study. These do happen, and it's actually pretty common for them to be somewhat impactful to your study. Now, these will include any procedural deviations, animal sickness or early deaths, or any other unexpected outcomes. These deviations need to be assessed for potential impact to your study and for potential impact to the safety and performance of your test article. Any data exclusions that you may do for your reporting need to be clearly identified and must be scientifically justified. Statistical methods should be disclosed, including the software type and version used, and there should be enough detail in your report that the reader can go from the source data through your analysis and trace to your conclusions. This is very important as the FDA will do this routinely. Now, that is it for the GLP regulations. There is one more element that you will be getting if you do a GLP study, and that is adherence to 21 CFR Part 11, which is electronic data controls. As the industry has gone pretty much all digital, the FDA did have to establish regulations to control the actual flow and accuracy and data integrity of digital data. And that is actually 21 CFR Part 11. These regulations provide a framework for electronic data and electronic signatures, and also provide requirements for validation, which is huge for the industry now. So I do recommend actually reviewing those parts of regulations if you intend to do a GLP study as well. So takeaways. In summary, if you do intend to do a GLP study, you will be getting the following. The study will give you a sound protocol, will be conducted by qualified personnel, will be controlled by written and understood SOPs, will be conducted in proper and adequate facilities using calibrated and maintained equipment, and will have fully retrievable human-readable data, overseen by an independent quality assurance unit. Now, these are very important as these represent the minimum good scientific practices of the FDA. For more information or for more educational opportunities, please see the 2 links enclosed. These are actually more in-depth GLP trainings. The GLPs are a large portion of the regulations, and there's a lot of nuance to them. I do recommend a thorough multi-day training if you intend to be really involved in a GLP study. In addition, the following links will have a further information for GLP in Part 11 and animal welfare. Please see them as needed. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and I hope this actually provided a little information for your neurotechnology program. Have a good day.